Thank you so much for joining us for our series of virtual in-conversation events. We are incredibly grateful to all of the creatives and artists who shared their time, their wisdom and their experience with us. It's easy to ask in the face of a global pandemic, why do the arts matter? But the truth is that theatre is as old as civilization itself. It's a place where we learn, we explore, and we share our common humanity. It's a pressure valve for society, a safe space in which to explore dangerous ideas. And above all, it's entertaining. At Dark Unicorn Productions, we rely very heavily on the support of our wonderful patrons to continue our work. You can join them and become a patron of the arts yourself by joining our scheme, which starts at just £50 per year to become a rainbow unicorn. Be part of the Dark Unicorn family. Be part of the recovery and the future of theatre. Don't let the lights go out. Become a patron today. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome once again to Dark Unicorn in Conversation. It's been a pleasure over the course of this series to, on a number of occasions, speak to friends who have made their mark in the arts industries. Today is no exception. Timothy J. Howe started life in Nottingham and spent his childhood and youth in Northamptonshire, but first crossed my path as a first-year undergraduate in 2007. When he made his presence felt on the seafront in Aberystwyth, where he was studying and I was lecturing. He, in fact, was in the same year group as Chloe Gale, now the burlesque artist Cadbury Parfait, whom we focused on a few weeks ago. But where many of his contemporaries went into performing or stage management or even out of the industries altogether, Tim chose to focus on the impact that theatre could have in communities, and particularly with young people. He has spent much of his professional life working as a paid employee of a number of institutions which have furthered the role of the arts with young people, whether that be the Kids R Us Youth Theatre in St Ives in Cornwall, where he was their productions director, or to as wildly different an institution as possible at Eton College, where he was the resident theatre director from 2014 to 15, a period during which I also consulted on some of his shows. Now he is the Communities and Creative Engagement Coordinator at the Sherman Theatre in Cardiff, working not only with their youth theatre and their adult amateur group, but also with outreach and work within the communities which Cardiff and the Shermans serve. When we sat down to speak, we started, as so often we do, looking at early life and when theatre first made its presence felt in his own existence.
Tim, we've known each other a little while now, but while I was present for the start of your tertiary education, as you heard in the intro, I did lecture Timothy J. briefly. I wasn't there for the really early stuff, so tell me, at what point did you realise that you were a theatre kid?
Oh God, I don't know really. Perhaps. Looking back on it, when you reflect on these things, when you actually have time to process, as we have all done over the last few months, of kind of having moments of reflection, I suppose. I think it began way back in my childhood with my sibling. I was very lucky to be in a family of 3 and with an older sister who governed through force of personality. And if we were going to play a game, it was going to be, she was in charge and there were rules and we were going to play schools, we were going to play this game, whatever. So we were already doing role play, I think, looking back on it now, and there's that, the idea that children have limitless imaginations and limitless worlds. And we only had one television, and it seems really bizarre now, doesn't it? That we had one television in the whole house, and it was this tiny little box in the corner of the room, and television time was 6:30 in the evening until 7:30, and so the rest of our days were filled with playing and being creative. And I think our parents, I was incredibly lucky that our parents had that set up in our house, that we were, visiting someone else's house who had Sky was like mind-blowing. People had more than 2 televisions in their house. I mean, why would you need more than 2 televisions in your house? So I think because we had all that gameplay and role play as children, and we created all these imaginary worlds around the house. I'm painting this picture of this very, I don't know, like idyllic growing up. I'm not going to say it wasn't, but it was full of imaginative play. So we were already creating these things, and we all took it in turns to create these worlds. And I think that was when I realized that disappearing into imagined worlds and creating these environments was a little bit more fun than being in the real world, because you could be who you wanted to be, and you could make other people be who you wanted them to be. It just feels like I'm something out of an Enid Blyton novel right now. Yeah, so that's I suppose, looking back, that's where it began. And then I just sort of went from there with the classic stuff with schools. The most frustrating thing for me at school was that my brother and I, although there's almost 2 years between us, with only one school year, because I'm September birth and he's in the summer, who constantly would be paired together in things. So they'd be like, oh, they can do that thing together because they're brothers and they can rehearse at home. Yeah, that was slightly frustrating, particularly as he doesn't quite have the same passion for the arts as I do. So I think early on there I was going, oh, maybe someone needs to tell these people what to do, because they don't know what to do. And then, second education was all about just discovering myself. And I think I found, I always think, looking back on my life and looking at the different things, as certain places and locations and environments that you just feel at home in, don't you? You feel at home. And I think that was how I felt about drama at school. Was there was something safe about the studio that we had at school. And again, we're incredibly lucky to have that space. And, and just, I just felt at home in that. So then it just flourished from there, and you just progressed. It was quite exciting. We did like the full scale musicals at school. And then we went into we had this music teacher who did the shows. I think every school has this teacher who goes, I'm doing the shows. That's my job, alongside all the other stuff I have to do. And she was just incredible. She cared so much about the shows and doing them and giving us that experience. And we used the local big theatre at the time, and it had proper stalls and a balcony, and it felt like a proper theatre. And we weren't in the school hall. We weren't in our small studio at school. We were in this proper theatre. And these were huge musicals we did. And I remember I did a few as lead characters. So we did Singing in the Rain, and we did Les Mis, and amongst other various like variety shows, the stock stuff that schools do to make money so they can do the bigger shows. And I distinctly remember the day she walked into, there was a group, she'd created a group called the Musical Theatre Workshop Group. And she took us in and took us through all these different things, and through acting, through song, improving our writing ability and all sorts of stuff. I mean, incredibly lucky that we had this woman who cared enough to do this. And I remember walking into the room in September of my A2 year, as if we didn't have enough on our plate already. This teacher decided to throw this thing at us and go, yeah, you're gonna write the show this year. Sorry? You're gonna write the show. So we wrote the school show, from scratch, book, music, script. And then just after Christmas, she then threw another curveball, which was, yeah, and you're going to do everything else as well. So one of you is going to be the musical director, one of you is going to be the choreographer, one of you is going to be the producer, stage manager. So she basically made us interview, like hardcore interview process for all these roles. You had to go in, pitch your ideas, talk about your process. I mean, he's age 18, doing all this stuff. And like looking back on it, really helped me decide that I didn't want to be on stage anymore. I wanted to be in a more, I saw a more holistically creative role, I suppose. But yeah, and I think looking back on it, I want to be her. You know, I want to be that person who can just go, oh yeah, we'll do this, because I benefited from someone doing that and going that mad and getting us to do that. And then the rest, I suppose, is history, because you know the rest. I went to Aberystwyth University, and yeah.
Yes, we'll come to that. You've touched on the fact that you wrote a musical by the time of your A2 year, or in your A2 year, not to blow your trumpet or anything. Do you tell us a bit more about that actual show, and what would you say you've learned since that would inform the process if you were to write it again?
God. So it was written as a group, you know, so I'm going to get this all wrong now. So if anybody who was involved in that process is watching, I apologize just endlessly for the gross misrepresentation I'm going to make of this process. But this is my recollection of it. There we are. I think I've covered myself there with a good solid politician's answer. So there was about 15 of us, I think, in that group. And of that group, 10 of us, I think, were sort of the hardcore ones who were going, yes, we're going to definitely make this work. Now, as you well know, I love musical theatre. I can carry a tune. But other than that, I have no musical ability whatsoever. I am aware that there are dots and lines on a page, and when they go up, it goes higher, and when they go down, it gets lower. Sometimes they're longer, sometimes they're shorter. Other than that, I'm not musically gifted at all. And so I decided I'd take on the book and the scenes and sort of find that area of it and what the story was. And I can't really remember. I remember a mass brainstorm. I vividly remember writing lots of ideas on one of those, I'm sure we all experienced in the school in some way, those flip whiteboards that you could rotate round. And we all wrote loads of ideas on this. And I can't remember what the other options were now, but we settled on basically the life story of Dick Turpin, the famous highwayman, because there was actually quite a lot of really interesting things about his life and how he'd managed to do all these incredible things. And then we just sort of theatricalized it. So we created this love triangle between him and this woman who was a maid in the house of a man who, if I remember correctly, he was Dick's tutor, fought him, and then later on became really pivotal to get him convicted. So that was in there. But this maid in his house was Dick's first wife. But he also had this love affair with this other woman. And then because it's musical theatre, we then introduced that there was one token woman in Dick's gang who had an unrequited relationship with him. So already you can see it's got classic separate note. And then we just basically went through and went, what's in a musical? What numbers do you have in a musical? And then we wrote our versions of it. So, the generic everyone's in the pub song, let's in the memories of the great Hammerstein, let's have a ballet to finish Act 1. So we had of course there was, but it was either that or our version of One Day More, and that was never gonna happen with our low level music ability. And then within that, there's 3 women. They've got to have a trio at some point. Why don't they have a trio where they've all received a letter from Dick Turpin? He's got to have a thing in the jail at the end. There's got to be some kind of funeral sequence, or there's got to be a bit that happens around him hanging himself, where he gets himself hanged. All those kind of things just sort of naturally came about. And then you got the whole thing was then told through the narrative voice of Swiftnick, which was his sidekick. Basically, for one, it's very, very and then there was a whole like subplot there about actually how Dick ignored him a lot of the time and sort of discarded his advice, and we tried to write a sort of semi-touchstone sort of. I mean, looking back on it now, in terms of like actually answering the question you asked, what would I do differently? I don't know. I don't think I would. If I was going to do the show again now, there's so much stuff I'd get rid of, and it would all be about trimming it down and making it tighter, and you know, ensuring that there was just a coherent creative voice throughout it, because there were so many people contributing to the story, and we worked in a very democratic way, and we all contributed. It just narratively, and the creative voice wasn't coherent enough, you know. And because actually then, as all as students, we were creating it together and then directing it and choreographing and music directing it, there was no one kind of going, well, actually that doesn't work, that needs to go, that needs to go, you know. We were all like, oh no, I created that bit, that can stay in, and so and so created that bit, that needs to stay in, that's their bit, that's the bit they did. So there was, you know, there is a sort of a cruel reality now that I look at and go, there is so much extra stuff in there that doesn't need to be, and if we got rid of it and not been so precious, I think we'd have created something else. But it's you know, it's being wise after the event, isn't it? Like at the time, you look at that and you go, my God, we wrote a show in 6 months. In 6 months, we'd written this show and ready, and we're in rehearsal. And you know, take note, theatrical world, 6 months, guys, 6 months. You know, I don't know why I said it like that. I mean, it's completely unrealistic, but you know, that's kind of, I suppose that vaguely answers the question.
It does. Oh, nice, yeah. So after that, you went to Wales, to Aberystwyth, where you studied in a fine drama department, stuffed to the gunwales with top-class academics and practitioners, and Adrian Keir. I always remember you as a very attentive student, but one who, although a perfectly good performer, had always had at least one eye towards directing. What is it about the director's role that appeals to you over and above performance?
Power.
I thought that might be the case, but yeah.
No, I think it's, I don't know. I think there's just, for me personally, there's just something more satisfying about being being sat in the audience. So, and you don't get that privilege as an actor unless you're in a long-running show and you're able to let your understudy go on, and you can sit and watch that happen from the audience and experience that show. You know, but or you know, or the big star name is able to see the show before they go in and experience what that feels like to be watching it. You know, and I just never got the same thrill. Being on stage and getting that response in the audience as you do when you are sat in the auditorium with them and going, oh my God, yes, this is how it feels. This is how this production feels to someone. Yeah, so that I feel I suppose that's why I always felt a little bit more attraction to that, and a bit more. I think you've got a little bit more. It's just a different relationship between you and the people as well. In the production, you get to experience it in a very different way, I suppose, it boils down to, and you get to have those conversations with people, and but also there's like a, I suppose one of the things I've always quite liked is order in organising things, and you get to do that a little bit more. You get to be going, right, this is what the process is. This is, you know, I've got a view of where this is going and what it's going to look like, and I can help people get there, or I can, but you're always surprised as well, aren't you? It's not like you're trying to get them to go down a, no, you have to play it like this route. You go, oh, okay, that you're taking me that way. Great, I'm going to respond in this way, and this is where the show is going to take me. And, yeah, I suppose that's sort of why. But ultimately, it comes back to being able to experience what you've created in a way that when you're on stage, you can't.
When you were an undergraduate, You also directed a musical each year for the 3 years for your course outside of your programme, often at your own expense. These, for the sake of posterity, were Tick Tick Boom, Bat Boy, and A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. What informed your programming choices at that time of your life?
All three are different, actually. All three had different kind of births in terms of that choice, I suppose. So Tick Tick Boom I was sort of handed by the Musical Theatre Society. I went and pitched them a few other ideas, and they said, yes, we'd love for you to be involved, but would you mind coming on board and co-directing this production with someone else? So I was handed that, but then sort of went, right, well, how do I make this into something that I would like to direct? And because that was my precocious mind as an undergraduate, was like, well, this show isn't good enough. I must solve it and make it into what I want. Which was fun, and it was really exciting to expand that and build that from a 3-person show to being an 11-person show. We did a lot of hard work on making that work in that format. And I sort of fell in love with that sort of more intimate theatrical setting. So that was Tick Tick Boom. So that was sort of a classic producer giving you something situation. Bat Boy was the one that I first sort of went out and was going, I'm doing my own thing. And I heard one song from that show, one song, and it was the end of the first act, which is Comfort and Joy. And for those of you that don't know, it's the musical comedy equivalent of One Day More. Basically, they've written it's almost it's not quite a parody, but it's a pastiche number, isn't it? Really. And I'd heard it, and I was like, who on earth writes this? Who sits down and goes, well, we're just gonna write One Day More, but in a different way for our show? And so that made me sort of find out who Lawrence O'Keefe was, and then look properly into the story. And I went, oh, do you know what? This is larks. This will be fun. So that's kind of where that came in. And it just struck me as being something a bit different. I always think that, particularly I felt as an undergraduate, that student theatre had a certain sort of, I don't know if you felt the same thing, but had a certain sort of, you had to fall into this kind of requirement. This is what you should be doing. Doing these angry plays, or these really edgy things, or and let's have full frontal nudity, and let's drop in this horrendous word in the first scene, kind of get everyone going. I was doing musical theatre, and I thought, actually, this show is quite edgy, but also it's really fun. Like, no one's going to leave this theatre being profoundly changed by this show, but they are going to have an absolute riot of an evening. They are going to have absolute joy, and frankly, it's all about loving oneself and loving other people. And also, this is my opportunity to do something a bit different. A show that requires, really, in reality, you need a bit. It's a big budget show. It's a big budget show. And I was scrapping around in my student loan and had about 400 quid. And you go, I could do it 400 quid. I can do this on 400 quid. I mean,
I'll do it in a week.
Do it in a week. Do a week. A case of Prosecco, and it's in a week. But yeah, it was that kind of madness, I think, and that kind of appealed to me as a theatre maker at the time, of going, how do you take something that is clearly large scale and find a way of not making it large scale? And by large scale, I mean it's not meant for a small studio that the addasydd of 75 seats is. It's not meant. It needs something that has the trappings of a bigger theatrical space. And then Forum was basically because I knew I was going to get bored. I knew I was going to get. And originally, I said, I'm not going to do anything in my third year. I've got to really concentrate on my degree. Looking back, I was just lying to myself. I was lying to everybody. And Katie Bottoms, who is an incredible actress, and at the time was the chairperson of the Musical Theatre Society, sort of made contact with me and said, are you going to pitch anything this year? I said, darling, I just don't think I'm going to have time. Well, it would be looked on favourably if you did. So I sort of went, I don't even know what I do, because I decided I wasn't doing anything. I didn't know. And so I just started trawling my brain for things that were of interest, you know, were things that I'd either watched in the past or, and also I knew I would enjoy creating and appeal to my sensibility. And I'm, you know, I like having an enjoyable evening in the theatre, you know, and I like other people to have an enjoyable evening in the theatre. And I love a farce. I love farce. Farce is the single greatest theatrical form known to man.
Oh, I do love farce.
My fault, I fear. So I just thought I need to find something that appeals to my sensibility in that regard. And like, how many musical farces are there? I can think of probably 3 off the top of my head that actually work. And in this sort of ferment in my head, I remembered that years and years ago, with that same music teacher from school, we'd done a variety show in which we'd open the show with Comedy Tonight from A For Anything Happened on the Way to the Forum. And I just went, oh, that was larks. I wonder what the rest of the show's like. Well, the rest of the show is just genius. You know, it's sometimes first score properly on its own that made it to Broadway. It's this incredible book. Zero Mostel created the character. It's got this incredible history of Tony Award-winning performers taking the lead role. And Frankie Howard played it when it first came to London. And you kind of go, this is something. This is something. And also it just lent itself to being sent up. So not only does it stand on its own, but you could then also, the framing device that I created with the team was that it was the world's worst amateur dramatic society putting on the show. So they just had a honky-tonk piano and a percussionist and the occasional spot effect from one of the cast members. And there were mistimed cues and they were wearing bed sheets instead of togas. And the set was sort of falling down all the time. And it just lent itself to that kind of mentality because it's got that kind of energy to it anyway as a piece. And that was where that came from. It just appealed to me at the time. And obviously it was, I say obviously, people don't necessarily know when I was at university, but I do and you do. But it was one of sometimes many glorious birthday years. You know, yeah.
Years ago.
Yeah, good Lord, was it? Good Lord, it was. So yeah, that
was his schedule to make contact. And,
yes, he did. He a dear friend, close friend, wrote to a variety of different people, and yeah, we got some really positive messages. And Stephen Sondheim himself wrote to the company, which obviously led to a classic, hilarious moment where one of the company thought he was dead, so couldn't believe that he'd written to us from beyond the grave. But there we are. Stephen Long may still be with us, but yeah. But I think that sort of sums up the company I had for that show, where we all were just having the most joyous time of our life in our final year at university, and we'd thrown the thing together in 6 weeks. You know, it was lark.
You've been involved in youth theatre from a very young age, and now are a facilitator and coordinator of youth theatre activities, as well as directing and programming for their work. And you've worked full-time in the field of youth performing arts for 6 years now. What do you think can make the performing arts such a vital force in the lives of young people?
I've been trying to have this discussion in my own mind for quite some time about actually how to get it down to something really pithy. So I apologise now, but this is going to be quite a rambling answer to your question, because I can't really, I mean, Kel Sapri, based on the rest of this interview, but I don't think, it's hard, because when I first entered into working with young people quite a lot, I realised that in that dramatic space, you're able to allow young people to fail, and fail spectacularly. You know, this is not new information, by the way. I'm not trying to, paint myself as being someone who just discovered this incredible thing, because this is not new information. We all know this is true, that theatrical spaces, like a drama studio or a workshop space or a production, allow young people to fail in this way that the rest of their lives don't allow for. There's quite there's a stigma to failure for young people, a huge stigma. If you've not achieved the grades, you've not done the best you possibly could, and I think the only other area in their lives that potentially has that, you've tried, you failed, but that's great, is sport. So you're at the end of these two things where we're going, you can train as well as you can, but if you're in the race and the other person has trained just that little bit better and they win, well, you did the best you could at that point, but you're going to go away and you're going to train and you're going to do better because you've now experienced failure and you know how that feels. And I think drama is sort of the same, in the sense of, when young people are going in that room and you create that space, you're creating a space that allows them to fail. We're in that. In fact, we welcome failure. We say constantly, and I'm sure you're the same with your performers when you're directing. We welcome failure. Failure is incredibly fun and freeing, and the basis of my practice with young people is all about that. It's all about saying, get it wrong, find ways that don't work for this scene, but let's follow them, let's chase them down this alley, and let's beat this idea senseless, and if it gets up and runs away again, then we can keep chasing it. But if it just lies there and doesn't get up, then we've probably done all we could, so let's come out of this and let's go on another journey now. So I think that kind of underpins quite a lot of it, but it's also about validation, isn't it? There's these two sides to it of going, you're going to fail, and you're going to fail big, and no one's going to blame you for that. But then we're also going, yes, do it, and saying yes, and validating their choices, and finding, the more I work in this sector of the industry, the more I find ways within my practice and within the work I'm doing to validate the young people's decisions. Because again, within their educational life, for good reason, they are being, they have to deliver in particular areas. So there is still a right and wrong, but they're just delivering to a set formula. This is how you write an essay, and it's this. It's peel or P or whatever it is now. Well, that's what it was when I was at school. Your paragraph structure was like point, explain, analysis, link, peel. See, can even remember it now, you see, but it's like going, well, there's a formula to writing, and you think, yes, I can understand why you want me to write like that, but actually in terms of the creative process, that's a long way down the line. I've got to do all this messy stuff at the beginning and have thousands of ideas and make a whole mess on the page before I can get it into some kind of ordered thing. And actually we skip that bit with young people. We kind of go, you've got the idea, now you're going to ordered. Whereas actually that bit in the middle is so important. That mess bit where we throw everything around and we pick something up and we try and do something with it. And young kids, like, you look at you when I'm working with like the tiny little children, their creativity and the stuff they come out with is bonkers. I mean, they always want to kill everybody, which is just really fascinating. Young people are like, and then they died. And you're like, did they? Or maybe they just fell over. Because if they die, you finish the story. But the stuff they will take you to, and the places that, the amount of times I've sat in session with young, really little kids who are still in primary school or still, just started school, and we'll take one of the most incredible journeys through outer space and heaven, and then right to the bottom of the sea, and then this planet over here that you've never heard of, but they know it really, really well. And the more you keep saying yes, and the more you keep validating those choices, the more joyous your process becomes, and the more you learn from them and they learn from you, and it becomes an environment where they're able to flourish. I think because of that is the value that youth arts bring. And we should never let that be subservient to main house and I'm using that quite in a very broad sense, programming, where we're talking about, here's this show that the adults are doing, and isn't it great that these adults are doing it, and the young people over here, look what they're doing in response to that. Well, actually, that's a bit backwards. It's sort of saying we know better than you, and you're going to learn from us. And this is quite funny, because I was in a session on Friday with Ned Glacier, who runs Company 3, and he said the same thing. We shouldn't allow that to sort of be subservient to it. They should be held as the same quality, and they should be sort of going, well, actually, here's this thing the adults have done, and here's this thing the kids have done, and it's completely separate, but it's still as equally valid. Because if we're not validating that work, then we're already saying that there's a power structure, and that this work only exists because the adults did this other work over here, and that to me just seems wrong.
I think there is an element that stems from the very source in terms of the funders now, because I mean it's I know filling out Arts Council applications, unless I'm showing some degree of community interaction with the work that I'm wanting to produce, I ain't going to get that. And youth theatre, I think, has been the lazy person's choice for where you put that community interaction in most, isn't it? I'll do something that I can take into the schools, or we'll get them to do something in response to it, and then hopefully we'll get the cash to do it. And you're quite right, it doesn't always that is not always the way to approach it, in terms of letting young people feel that their work has value.
Yeah, I think, and I do think it is. It's very much it's very much a historical thing, isn't it? It's the fact that large buildings and organisations were the homes to these youth theatres, and so they were always seen as sort of that what you've just described. They were that kind of community young engagement thing that was always just sort of there. And as you have rightly said, structurally, that was how that was justified, but actually it doesn't need to be. And it's just about being as we've all realized across this pandemic period, it's just about kind of going, actually, let's look at this, let's talk about this, and how do we change that for the better? How do we change that attitude? How do we validate this area of our sector? Because if we don't, then there is no sector ultimately, because we're not encouraging people to engage with it from a young age and find that voice and that creativity, and that then feeds into finding these opportunities for as many voices that have as of yet been unheard. And if we don't foster that by going, your work is equally valid, then we're not allowing them that opportunity to grow and flourish as young people, and then as the future of the industry, be that as makers, as writers, as actors, as musicians, as ultimately people who attend. If we're not saying you are welcome here and you are validated by this process, then ultimately you can't, that person's not going to want to have a relationship with the arts, and they're not going to encourage other people to have a relationship with the arts. So it all just becomes sort of slightly self-fulfilling. It's really hard, it's not easy, and it's not like it's going to happen overnight, because as we are constantly talking about at the minute, like, change takes time, and when things are built into the system, we've got to look at how we unpack that and rebuild that, and it's not going to happen overnight. And I'm not that naive, but it would, it's just nice to stick your flag in the sand and go, this is what I think should happen. And just see what happens.
Your work in youth theatre has taken you from working with 13 to 18-year-olds at Eton College to possibly slightly less traditionally rarefied, but quite middle-class offering in Cornwall, to working with young people of all sorts of walks of life in your current role at the Sherman Theatre in Cardiff. How much tailoring of what you do is required to the backgrounds and reference points of the youngsters you deal with in any given environment, and how much of it do you say is universal?
Well, first of all, you start to realize really quickly how old you are, because all your cultural reference points are just gone. You say, oh, such and such, and they're like, what? I mean, I made some reference to MySpace the other week in a session, and I may as well have just spoken about, quantum physics as far as they were concerned. So I think this also comes back to the other thing we were talking about. So there's a lot of universal things, there's a lot of kind of going, right, actually, what universally appeals to young people? And it's honesty, it's laughter and fun, it's creativity, it's ownership, it's finding all those things that are universal. And generally those things are sort of just the things that underpin my practice. And I don't think I've had to massively tailor and change. Like I have naturally changed because you're responding to the people you're in the room with. So certain reference points, as you rightly identified, don't necessarily equate across the board. I remember very distinctly having to explain, for instance, at Eton, the value of, I did the lady colours with some students there, and having to explain to them about the value of the money that they were stealing in that, getting their heads around that was a lot of money was actually quite difficult. Whereas actually, if I'd done that same play in Cornwall, I wouldn't have had to have that conversation, but I'd have had to have a different conversation with them about the music that was so intrinsic to that play. That's not in their frame of reference. Mm-hmm. So it just literally depends on, and then when I'm in, like now in my current role in Cardiff, it's kind of trying to find their voice within plays that are intrinsically not written for their voice. Where we work with a lot of play text, and quite often we have these really interesting discussions about the fact that they feel like, well, first of all, and I think this is universal for young people, there's a big conversation happening about people's voices in theatre, quite rightly. But the one thing that has been said for quite a long time, and I've been saying certainly for the last 4 or 5 years, is that we keep handing young people plays written by adults and going, this is what you sound like. These are the words that you say. And quite often you have these really interesting discussions with young people who go, I would never say that like that. And I would never say that like that. So it becomes quite interesting. And then navigating the other thing in Wales is that I'm really, really keen to get as much Welsh language as the young people use it into the plays. So quite often we'll translate sections and let the young people translate them into their use of the Welsh language, which is very different from like an academic use of the Welsh language. I don't want to be misrepresented. I know it's not a situation unique to my job right now, but it's just that's what I'm facing, and I just think we are doing a huge disservice to young people by not saying, yeah, do it. Find how you put your language and your view of the world into this play, because we do it with adults. This comes back to the previous question. We do it with adults. We talk about how they find their way in a play. So let's do the same with these young people. And that's not being, it is a fine line to tread, because it's about then going, well, actually, but how do we respect the original text? How do we, respect the original intentions of this play, but also make it relevant to you and your experience of life, and that's, it's an ever-changing feast.
Well, I think that it also leads into my next question, which is that when you work beyond the youth category as well, with communities and what's termed creative engagement, which is one of those terms that has sort of popped up in the last however many years, and which I think the nuts and bolts of which are probably familiar to people, but not necessarily when put in that way. Can you expand on that term a bit? What does your current job involve? What difference can you make to lives outside the immediate impact zone of a theatre?
I think it's about, it comes back to that thing. I talk a lot about when I lecture, and I don't mean lecture like, lecture. I mean like when I'm invited by the universities here in Cardiff to go and lecture their students on my practice and what I do and how that works. I think a lot of people would probably see that what I do is outreach. Is probably the easiest sort of word. They're all outreach, participation, creative engagement. It's all really similar in the same sort of area. It's just whatever venue or organisation chooses to use their terminology for in that. I think, again, it's about coming to people and talking to people and saying, like, you know, how do you feel about this thing? And like, is there anything we can do creatively to help you respond to that? And then getting them in touch either with people that are work for the Sherman, or are people who are, you know, are professional freelancers and are able to give people the contact they need. I look at it as being, so legacy is probably the watchword, and I'm sure that you know, you're talking about your Arts Council funding applications. I don't, you know, I will put my hands in the air and say I don't really know much about the Arts Council England funding applications, but certainly a lot of the funding that we're talking about in Wales, you know, we have to think about the legacy of the work. Like, what is the impact beyond the work we're doing now? And I talk about legacy in two forms, and like there's like hard legacy and soft legacy. And for me, hard legacy is like the fundamental thing, whatever that is. So if that's the play or the performance or the event, or it might be the play text that the participants have created, or the visual art, or whatever it is, that hard legacy is the thing that we can all go back to. And it could be just photographs or video footage or whatever it is, but that's like the hard legacy that everyone can kind of recall back to. And in 20 years time, we can go right back to and go, this thing that happened, this is what it looked like and sounded like, and you know. And there's soft legacy, and soft legacy is the impact of the work. So it's going, right, well, I've created this project and these people have taken part in this project, and I have no, unless I become the world's best stalker, I can't tell you if someone in 5, 10, 15 years time is still going to have a relationship with the arts, and theatre or cinema or whatever it is that we've worked on them with. I can't tell you if that's going to happen because I don't know. And it might be that circumstance now means they can't just go, great, I'm going to turn up at the theatre, I'm going to do this. You know, obviously circumstance now means they can't do that, but I meant in a broad thing. So I just think that is such an immeasurable thing. You can't possibly sit down and go, right, how do we know what this person is going to do in 10 years time? And and I think it's that soft legacy is the hard thing to kind of get to grips with. And that for me is like about the impact that we have on the wider community. It's about setting up that relationship and just then going, right, we've done everything we can right now. We have, we've set them up with their relationship with the arts. We have provided them with the opportunity to engage. We have pointed them in the direction of how they can access this by removing obstacles and barriers that they may face. It's now up to them. Like, I'm not going to force someone to turn up and engage if they don't feel inclined to. Like, they have to do it on their terms. So I think that when you're talking about the wider impact of creative engagement across a community, it's about just making people aware of the arts and telling them they can have a relationship with it in whatever capacity they want to. We all know that sort of semi-famous image about equity and equality and the three people stood behind the fence trying to look over in the boxes. I'm sure you know that image, and I always think there's actually another image at the end of that, which is kind of going, well, you've given people the opportunity. It's now their choice whether or not they tear the fence down, which would seem like the obvious solution at this stage. You've kind of gone, right, well, we've shown you what would happen if we split the boxes up. Here's the hammer, here's the saw, tear the fence down. That you can see what's over the fence now. So, and we've shown you how, we've shown you that and helped you see that. Now here are the tools to tear that fence down so you can go and do it yourself. And I think that's kind of, in a very pretentious and convoluted way, I think that's what the impact of creative engagement is. It's going into communities, talking to people, find those connections, and then saying, this is a space for you. Please engage, but I'm not going to force you to do that if you don't feel welcome.
Your work in your current role has also led you towards writing adaptations of novels for your work, first with the Bangers and Chips explosion, which I gather, is with the original author's blessing, going to work its way through the process of being published as a co-credited script. And more recently, although COVID, I think, possibly got in the way of this, Treasure Island. What interests you in adaptation as a written form, and what does that bring you that original work doesn't?
I suppose it's easy to sort of start from the point of saying this is why I created the work originally. As you well know, having been someone who lectured me and had on occasion need to read my written work, I am not what one would describe as a writer. I write, but I'm not a writer, and I wouldn't ever it's something I do, but I wouldn't say it's my thing, if that makes sense. I certainly, some of the writers I know, I wouldn't even like to, bracket myself. However,
I have to say, though, I mean, in speaking in your defence, I have read, leaving aside the academic work, actually none of which of yours, I did read, I second marked some of your work, but I've read your creative stuff, which is, which I don't think you give yourself enough credit for, and I don't say that lightly, as you know. I don't give credit. Why would I? I'm a producer. But it's I felt the need to intervene there. Your work is wonderfully adequate.
And that faint praise is all I need. I tell a lot, again, this all comes back to everything we were talking about previously. I have a growing frustration at the fact that we have society, in terms of our theatrical society, we are the big organisation. So generally speaking, and this is very broad and sweeping, so get your brushes out and sweep up my broad sweeping comments. The national companies are the ones that can afford to do, we're going to have 25 people in this company, and we're going to have all this other stuff. So we can have 27,000 named characters because we can afford to do that. And we've got enough talent on stage to do that. And brilliant. It's brilliant that they're doing that. But the majority of stuff that that gets out there and gets published, in my experience, that is of a quality that I think reflects what I want to do with our young people, and has enough balance to it, is smaller ensemble plays. So there's this huge gap in the middle where we're going, well, actually, once we've done those big plays that the national companies have commissioned and created, what's left to do? Do we just cycle through those 5 or 6? It's like when you see amateur companies, bless them. When I was growing up, I think every single amateur company in Northamptonshire within 18 months of each other did a production of Fiddler on the Roof. And as worthy as that show is, there's only so many times you can sit through it, and I say that as a musical theatre lover and someone who loves that show. But I got about 3 in and I was like, I'm sorry, I know what's going to happen in the end, this is great, but they're going to get thrown out of the village, and spoiler, the fiddler follows them. Do you know what I mean? And so I basically sat down and went, what is missing from this canon? And it's the plays that are about and for young people, but also fill a lot of requirements, because we get the incredible work the National Theatre does in the Connections scheme. Those plays tend to fall into this kind of very angry young people zone of kind of going, we need to say all this stuff about our experience and how terrible our lives are right now and how we're being squashed by this and this and this pressure. And actually that's great. And there's a place for that as well. But I wanted to find something that was appealing in a fun and light and frothy way for young people. And there aren't that many plays on a scale that means everyone gets a fair crack of the whip. I'm all for Spear Carrier 1 coming in and telling us that the battle has been lost. But that just feels like you're doing a bit of a disservice to that child, that they rush in with their spear. My lord, the battle is lost. That's it. Feels a bit of a disservice to them as a performer. So there's lots of there were lots of these things sort of bubbling away in my head, and I read a lot of plays by incredibly talented writers and very well-known writers, and nothing kind of appealed and sat in the right place. And I remembered this book, The Bangers and Chips Explosion, that I had read as a child and had bought in one of those, the library are selling all the old books sales, for 10 pence or something. And I thought, oh, this would be great as a play. I wonder if someone's already adapted into a play, because it just screams to be theatricalized for young people. It's set in a school. There's copious amounts of young people involved. There's also these ridiculously grotesque and caricature characters. Ruff, who's the writer, Ruff Girling, there's something almost Roald Dahl about these grotesque adult characters he's created, and but they're also so on point of like how children would see these people. So the children see through the inept head teacher, and they see how inept he is. So that's how he's written. In the book, the school secretary, who they know organizes everything, keeps everyone on track, is the heroine of the story. Spoiler, because that's how the children see her. So everything's written. Again, I can't help going back to Roald Dahl. It's written like he wrote from the perspective of the young people in his stories and found a language for them. So I then pitched this idea to the young people and said, does this feel like something you would like to do? If I scraped together a script from this, is it something that you would be interested in doing? Do you think it would be a nice, fun counterpoint to doing our connections piece, which is that sort of more hard-hitting stuff? And without fail, they were all like, yeah, we'd love to do something fun. It just feels like we always have to do these really angry plays about, and we'd like to do something light and frothy. So I went away and wrote it and adapted it. And it was one of those joyous books where actually there wasn't really much I had to do. It was lifting direct from what he'd written on the page. There was some reallocation. We created all the children became this children's narrative voice throughout all of it. And we just set the whole thing then is just set in the school and happens in the school. And you get the bonkers things of the chief police constable turning up in drag because he thinks that's how he's going to get into the school. And I think the only thing I added to Bruff's script, to Bruff's story for the stage adaptation was just the conclusion for one character, which in the book you don't need it. It's almost a throwaway. But in terms of the stage adaptation, you kind of just needed that extra little bit of theatricality to end someone's story. I just really enjoyed doing it, and then we did it, and I went, I'm gonna have to do another one now, because we've sort of set ourselves up that this is how we do it. And Treasure Island sort of appealed. It's a proper swashbuckling adventure. There's also slightly part of me that is going, how do I skill build for these young people? How do we find different things to tickle their theatrical fancy and also allow them to come away from it going, I learned this thing. So Bangers and Chips was all about learning about working in the semi-round. That was the space. They had to work in the semi-round to tell this story. It wasn't, I say semi-round because it wasn't quite thrust and it wasn't quite all in the round, but it sort of was anyway. So let's just go with semi-round and let's pretend that was like really profound and professional. So whereas Treasure Island is about like, it's this swashbuckling adventure, so it's actually, which has got this true kind of like growing up story within it, and finding oneself and like realizing that you didn't need all these people to be who you need to be. Haven't quite pinned it down fully yet. It's sort of, we're in a redraft stage now because I've taken the time to do it. Because of COVID, I just sort of went back and went, right, let's do a redraft. I've got time to do it. So it's had a little bit of a reorder and refiddle, and it's a fast book, like in terms of scale and story. So yeah, I suppose it's what started to appeal to me initially about adapting was that ability to give everybody a voice. But as I further moved into it, it's that it's taking that thing that's in your mind and putting it on stage, and you're able to do the bit in between and craft and choose and take that story and reinvigorate it for a different mode and form. And that sort of appeals to my sensibility, I suppose, as well, of kind of visually taking something from the book and not being disappointed by what happens in the end, as so often you can be when you go and watch the film or theatre adaptation of a book that you know and love and go, but that's not how it was in my head. So yeah, I suppose that's sort of where it's kind of got two starting points, and I think it also sort of just feeds into my laziness, which is someone else has created the character and the plot, and you just kind of have to reorder it and edit. Like that just appeals to my inner lazy person, I suppose.
You mentioned taking the time because of COVID to redraft, and obviously the pandemic has changed a lot of how all of us in the arts world are working. What's changed for you? How are you adapting to it? And both within and beyond COVID, what do you think are the major challenges that the arts and its engagement with communities are facing?
It's a nice small question. So for me personally, it was just I'm going to try to answer this question, but I might, like, rather than trying to answer it logically, I might blur the lines a bit. So just because it's quite, for me personally, at the minute, there's just small changes. So it's kind of, right, we're going to move this program online. This program's going to be digital. This program's going to be an analog program. We're going to have to send out information to people about this. I mean, the initial bit in the first lockdown, everything stopped. You know, we kept in touch with people. We sent out a lot of written stuff, a lot of what I would traditionally say would be, you know, resource-based activity. That's probably the best way to describe it. Went out to people to keep engaging with, and then we did some Zoom sessions with some of our other programs. And then we normally have a hiatus across the summer anyway, so that was quite useful because it gave us a chance to sort of take stock and really look at how the programs would develop. So our youth theatre program is now a blended learning, so we're using a series of Zoom sessions and pre-recorded tutorials. We have a program, Introduction to Playwriting, which is for 15 to 18-year-olds, so that's all digital. It's all gone online, and that's just a series of we've commissioned playwrights to talk to young people about their practice. So they do a bit of an introduction, and they give a couple of exercises, but that also comes with a written resource as well, that sort of backs that up. So in the short term, we've done that. There's the main programming has sort of become audio drama based, which is great, and we've rolled that out. And we'd adapted a program that we were literally weeks away from performing just before lockdown. And with lockdown, we adapted, and we're working with a local college, and we changed that into an audio play. That was a huge challenge, and I think that kind of movement has sort of swept along for the rest of our programming as well, which is really good. And that's one of those very healthy moments where we proved it worked for our department, and then we were able to pass that up to the main programming. And we're doing another one of those during this period, leading up to Christmas. I think the difficult thing about looking forward to what will come next is trying to be analog in a digital world, because we've all kind of switched into this mode of working, of going, we can put it online, people can still access it, and actually that is still a big obstacle for a lot of people. We've got to find ways to adapt what we do into how do we find those moments of analog, as I call them, within a digital world. So that is simply the person that doesn't have internet access, or doesn't have enough data on their data package to stream whatever it is you're asking, or doesn't have mobile signal, or only has a phone, doesn't, particularly some of the older people we work with, a lot of them aren't as tech savvy, so I think there's a big question to be asked about how we how we create long-term programs that work in that environment where we still are within a social distance environment, and we're still able to get people to access that. I think there's a big question that we're not currently comfortable with answering, which is, how is somebody's home a safe space in the same way that a rehearsal room is? So there's there's a very interesting debate, I think, to be had there, about how we help people and support people in that way. I think there's a lot. I don't have any answers, but I know that these are the challenges we're going to be facing. And I think until we really know from both senior artistic leadership, so arts councils level, and from a national government level, what the next steps are for arts venues and arts practice, I think it's very hard to work out how participation and outreach will work in that world. And until we have some of those answers, we're very much doing the best we can in the circumstances we are, being very reactive rather than proactive, and that's never easy, because we know that we're missing people and people are missing us. But I think until we have a bit of a clearer sense of what that looks like, it's going to be really hard to go say, this is how we provide. So, and that wasn't very positive. I'm very sorry, but I think that's just where we're at,
Well, I think it is. Yes, it's we're always adapting. What is next on your professional to-do list? What do you still want to achieve?
Notoriety. What's next? I don't know. I genuinely don't know what's next. I think when I first left drama school in, good Lord, 2012. I think it was 2012. I'm sure your researchers will, sort that out in the edit. But 2012, I think it was, I left drama school, and I was going, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna be a director. I'm gonna run this venue. I'm gonna do, and then very, very quickly those hopes, dreams, and ambitions dissipated when the realities of that world became home. When you've gone education to education to education, and you've sort of sat in that little bubble and gone, I can be a success, and then you come out and go, okay, there are many other hundreds of people who are also saying they can be a success. It's what, big fish, small pond situation, isn't it? And then small, tiny, minuscule bacteria in vast ocean is reality, what it feels like. So what's next professionally? I don't know. I've given up trying to think that far ahead. I just think something will come along and appeal to my sensibility at that moment. I will apply, and it will either happen or it won't. And then I'll go, okay, that's the next thing. I'd love to get, I suppose, I'd love to get the plays that I'm adapting and changing published. But again, if that doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. They're still there sitting, and I can go back to them at some other point. So yeah, I don't know. It's a really terrible answer to quite an interesting question, but I don't know what's next. And I think whatever's next is whatever's next.
Well, it's remarkably honest. That will always find its reward. As with all 21 of our previous guests on here, we pay tribute to the late James Lipton of Inside the Actors Studio by concluding with a little quick fire section, which just gives a bit of insight into everybody and just level the playing field a bit. Yeah. What's your favourite word?
Follow.
What's your least favourite word?
Moist. I'm sure someone else probably said that, but moist always makes me feel a bit.
What turns you on?
Ooh, laughter.
And what turns you off?
Invading my personal space without permission.
What sound or noise do you love?
Ooh. Should we give the pretentious theatrical answer?
You can give whatever answer you want.
I don't know. There's a sound. What sound do I love? Ooh, no. I tell you the sound I do love. The little click when a kettle has just boiled, because you think, I'm gonna have a coffee.
What sound or noise do you hate?
That little, do you know, that low level, being serious now, that low level, like hum or squeak or background sound that just cuts through and distracts you from doing anything.
What is your favourite swear word?
Oh, twat. I love a good twat. I'm sure someone else has probably said that, but twat is so great.
I don't think we have had twat, actually.
Twat is great. Isn't twat great?
Great word, twat. Yeah.
Because you can just use it in so many different ways.
There's a tremendous sort of inbuilt aggression of it as well. Isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's those hard T's, isn't it?
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Do you know, I'd really, this is going to be so bizarre. I'd really like to do something the complete opposite of what I do. So something like a builder or something like that. That's like the complete polar opposite.
And what profession would you absolutely never want to do?
Oh, I wouldn't want to do anything medical because I just couldn't. I admire our the people who work in the medical profession, because I just think I couldn't do it. I couldn't go into work every day knowing that potentially the decisions I'm making are changing someone's life for better or worse. I just couldn't. I couldn't do that.
When your time comes, if you discover that heaven exists, what would you like to hear said to you on arrival?
Oh, you're on the list.
I have to tell our audience here that the one thing that both surprises and slightly disappoints me is that at no point in any of those sort of very open questions or any of it has Timothy mentioned I thought we might get it on sound or noise or profession you'd like to attend. I thought there'd be something train related.
No, do you know what? No, because that's about smell. You didn't ask me a question about smell. That's smell. Like there's nothing more exciting in the world than that the smell of a steam engine. The sound is one thing, but the smell is the thing. And anyone listening and watching who is a train buff would I'd like to think would agree with me. There's just something about that, the smell of a steam engine that you can't replicate. And then the smell of the upholstery in a train carriage. There's nothing like that. There's nothing. I see what you're saying, and I'm sorry that I disappointed you, but I feel like that little bit there, that semi-orgasmic state that I had there about train smell would probably counterbalance your disappointment.
Well, yeah, it has. It has very much. For anybody needing to fill a slot in their online program of talks and lectures, Tim can give a really truly fascinating chat about the switching points between diesel and electric on certain parts of the London railway network. And he's also available for weddings, funerals and bar mitzvahs. On which note, Timothy J. Howe, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us.
No, thank you.